So just a heads up, this next talk does have content that will both include violence and alcohol misuse. So if you have young ones here that you don't want to hear that, or if that's not content that you feel comfortable hearing, we do have this recovery room here open. You're welcome to go in there and relax, and we'll close the door so that you are not able to hear this. But that said, it's my pleasure to introduce Emily Hemendinger. Emily is a social worker and my partner in crime. She's a clinical director of the OCD program and also oversees our intensive outpatient program and developed the curriculum for that program. Emily is probably the most prolific media person that I know. She has published in what? The Lancet, the Washington Post, Conversation, I don't know, all sorts of places. She's also been on a bunch of different TV shows. Anyway, if there's a topic, Emily can write about it. So Emily is going to share her story about the intersection of trauma and OCD through both the lens of personal experience and professional experience. So Emily, thank you so much.
Bear with me as I put my USB in and try to get this slide up, because I did prepare something, because I cannot speak off the cuff like that. So maybe. Okay. Sorry, everybody. Oops. Oh my god. I don't know what's happening. Thank you. Okay. Well, I started with this picture, just side note, because it is Rohan in New Zealand. Well, you know, from Lord of the Rings, and our theme is adventure. So I wanted to start with that. And also Lord of the Rings is amazing. But, all right, I'm very, very honored to be here at our third Exposure Palooza event as an organizer and as a speaker this year. I have had anxiety and OCD for most of my life, since probably sometime between 4 to 8 years old. I didn't know that my thoughts were intrusive or that I was experiencing mental and physical compulsions. I didn't think there was anything necessarily different from my way of experiencing the world, although I did often find myself feeling like an outcast or very different from my peers. Despite this, I had a very happy childhood with a wonderful family who loved and supported me unconditionally. I'm also a twin, so you can see that. I've experienced all sorts of flavors of OCD, including existential themes, magical thinking, contamination concerns, just right and perfectionism, religious and moral scrupulosity, hyperresponsibility, and even some harm themes sprinkled in there throughout my life. One early example I like to share was that at 9 years old, my grade took an IQ standardized test. My parents were called by the school and told that my identical twin sister and I both failed the IQ test, which did not match our daily progress in school. We had answered everything correctly, but neither one of us answered enough questions to pass. When asked what happened, we both separately explained that the teacher had instructed us to be very careful with filling in the circles on the answer key to make sure there were no marks outside the circles or the answers would not be counted at all. So we both spent so much time filling those circles and erasing any stray marks perfectly that we didn't have time to complete the test. This rigid and fear-based perfectionistic thinking were both early red flags, but the school personnel did not recognize this as OCD or even as anxiety. However, my parents knew something was up. My parents are saints. I don't know where they went, but they are here, yeah. My parents are saints, and they're the absolute best, most patient and most supportive people. They recognized that I was struggling with anxiety and depression and secured therapy for me when I was 12. And while I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 15, this was at the same time I received the diagnosis of anorexia nervosa. So that took precedent, and no one ever explained what OCD was to me beyond perfectionism and how it interacted with the eating disorder. Then, in my college clinical psychology class, I learned about OCD in a decently detailed way, especially for a college class. I remember walking out of my class and needing to just sit alone for a while. I was really stunned by the realization that the people that I saw and the way that I saw and experienced the world was very different from many people. That most people didn't go around repeating hand motions and praying every time they had a feeling that was not right, or a feeling that was bad, or interacted with something triggering for fear of something bad happening to their loved ones. Most people didn't have fears of getting sick or being contaminated. Most people didn't think about existential themes, such as constant hyper-awareness of time passing, or trying to figure out what happens when we die, to the point of panic. The information that I learned in that class was validating, and this was the beginning of my understanding of how to function with OCD, among others who sometimes didn't understand my mindset. Despite providing exposure response prevention and understanding OCD conceptually, it was not until I worked specifically with the OCD population, throwing myself into fully understanding each and every iteration of it, did I actually come to terms with the level of my own OCD. The eating disorder and depression were always the priorities for providers, and no one asked, so I didn't say anything. It was not something I really felt comfortable discussing, nor did I feel I had the words at the time to describe my experience. Through my therapeutic experience, trainings, and my own studying, I was finally able to find the words to describe what I had been experiencing since I was a child. So that's some background to kind of set the stage. I could talk about so many different areas of my life that OCD has impacted. For instance, the intersection with my eating disorder, which I'm 18 years recovered from, how it interacts with being an OCD therapist, or any really more straightforward and easy topic, but because it's me, I decided that it was a good idea to talk about one of the most difficult times in my life, how it interacted with my OCD, and how years later it triggered one of my bigger OCD spikes I've experienced, because why do something easy and comfortable? That being said, please bear with me as I share an experience I've never spoken about publicly or really to many people about. So in 2012, I spent my college's January term with my anthropology class in South Africa. We were there to learn about the people, culture, and customs. It was set to be a wonderful experience of learning and cultural immersion. Midway through our month abroad, we stopped in a small town called St. Lucia. This seemingly quiet beach town was a destination for many South Africans, particularly Afrikaners. On our last night in town, our group of students and chaperones went out to the local bar. We were drinking and dancing. Then, I was waking up the next morning to the shoves and loud exclamations from my roommates that we needed to get on the bus to leave. I sat up disoriented, very sore all over my body, and with the worst headache of my life. I scanned my surroundings. I knew where I was, knew that I needed to get moving and pack my things, knew I was in my dress from the night before, and was gaining awareness that my roommates were peeved at me. As I got up, I discovered a number of cuts and bruises all over my body. When I thought back and tried to recollect the night, I hit black nothingness in only a few hazy moments. As I boarded the bus, receiving a mixture of pitying, annoyed, and disgusted looks from my classmates, I sat alone and strained again to think through the night. Before my eyes flashed the night sky, unfamiliar with the constellations of the southern hemisphere and dark shadows of trees and brush. A dark room and a bed, feelings of weakness while saying the word no, and then physically and metaphorically falling back into oblivion. Looking through my digital camera, I had pictures of myself and my classmates dancing, and finally with a group of Afrikaner men arms around us all. That was all I had. To my OCD's horror, there were massive holes in my night. And to even more of my OCD's horror, no one on that trip wanted to talk to me about it. I had to cobble together my peers' stories to try to make sense of it, but no one had full answers. And I kept trying to ask more questions, but only receiving answers with partial information. After reeling and searching the depths of my mind and interrogating my classmates, the information I did gather led to the realization that I had been drugged and sexually assaulted by a group of Afrikaner men, and that my classmates had come to retrieve me once they realized I was missing. And I'll say that to this day, while I get flashes of memories, I still don't know the full story of what happened that night. And that haunted me for a long time. Only now, many years removed and healed, am I able to mostly accept that it will remain that way. Tasked that month by our professor to jot down and journal daily, my school book was split in two. The front was filled with my anthropological observations. Meanwhile, the back was filled with pages upon pages of ruminations and intrusive thoughts. Compulsive scrawling of trying to figure it out and trying to remember what happened. I would go back and forth between being the ever-dutiful student completing her assignments and then frantically writing in the back pages, mad with not being able to remember and not being able to know for sure what happened, a wild fiend searching for proof that I was innocent, that what had happened didn't actually happen, and at the core, the belief that if I just think and write about it enough, I'll remember it all and fill that blackness in my mind. It's hard to put to concise words anything about that time period after the trip. I watched as stories from my friends changed to absolve them of any guilt, and official reports were redacted by police. I became a social pariah at my school. The president of my college told my parents that what happened to me was akin to her daughter spraining her ankle on her January trip. As I tried to reconcile what had happened with what was happening, tried to remember and tried to figure it all out, all while applying for graduate schools and just trying to graduate, I turned to numbing myself out, to disconnecting to get through it. I look back on that time period and feel it's hard to recognize the person I was. So let me wax poetic here for a moment to describe more of that time period. I drank to forget what I couldn't remember. I drank because the need to know was incessant, the constant striving, reaching to remember something that was truly and utterly gone, not even remnants of it in the trash bin on my mind's desktop. So I numbed myself up, sewing myself together, loose pieces sailing through the night, thinking, will I be all right? Asking nighttime companions, am I all right? But I wasn't all right. Thinking back on that time, the anthropology journal for my time abroad was probably a good representation of how I navigated the immediate time and following months after the assault. I appeared one way to the world, but felt drastically different on the inside. I did what I had to in order to graduate and was on autopilot. But internally, I was frantic and ever searching to remember. I was trying to build any sort of case and gather any evidence to prove innocence to others, to prove that I wasn't the out-of-control pariah they made me out to be. I just wanted to be believed. And even if I did remember, or was able to actually read the compiled witness report from campus safety that was just a page of black lines, everything redacted, my brain would still be searching for proof that it was in fact my fault, or wasn't my fault, for the tiniest hint that I had some control in the horrible thing that happened to me. Because that's how OCD works. It seeks certainty in a world where certainty is just an illusion. The importance of proving my innocence is one many with OCD can relate to. For many, the core of their OCD is a belief and fear that we are bad, that something is wrong with us, that we are out of control monsters who pose a threat to society. So we do everything in our power to prove, even subconsciously, that we are not a threat. And when this is out of our control, it feels unbearable. Because we don't want to hurt people, we don't want to do wrong things, because it's not who we are at all. And with trauma, it's similar. When we don't feel believed, it fosters shame and feelings of being broken, bad, or helpless, a feeling that can bring us right back to the trauma. With both OCD and trauma, not being believed can continue to fuel hyper-responsibility, intrusive thoughts, and self-blame. So I drank and sought relief in others to numb all that out and to just survive through graduation. I graduated and went to graduate school for my master's in social work, my master's in public health. With therapy, I worked on the trauma of it all. With support and time and renewed focus on school and community, I began healing. The striving to remember was there, but I tried to push it away. It wasn't labeled OCD, so I didn't treat it as OCD. So I healed slowly, finished grad school, moved to Colorado, and built a really beautiful life and community. And I need to take a sip of water. This is a lake in Colorado that is one of my favorite places, Ice Lake, near Silverton, if anyone wants to visit. Okay, fast forward to 2024. I was continuing as clinical director of the outpatient program and recently opened intensive outpatient program. I was loving my job, getting along with the team, and while life had ups and downs, as did my OCD, things were good. However, from the summer to the fall, I had to take on my first major challenge as a director. I had to navigate managing a difficult employee situation. Over several months, a professional relationship became increasingly strained, with frequent and intense communication, boundary violations, and concerns raised about my competence that did not align with my understanding of events. I diligently documented interactions and involved leadership, but due to limited transparency and delays in resolution, this led to confusion and speculation within the broader community and team. As the situation escalated, I found myself questioning my own memory and judgment, not in a reflective, helpful way, but in a compulsive, invalidating way. And even though I had all of the documentation, truly all of the documentation, there was this persistent little voice in my head that said, yeah, what if? I felt a strange but familiar sense of franticness to prove innocence, to be believed, or at the very least to know for certain what was going on and what had happened. This led to hours upon hours of rereading texts and emails, policies, documentation, reassurance seeking from coworkers and leadership, mental reviewing, theorizing, and trying to figure it out. I felt like a husk of a human that autumn. During the day, my energy was on my patients, my team, and keeping the program running. But after sessions and meetings, my energy was fully on compulsions. I made myself sick to my stomach, finding it hard to eat at times. I had no energy to be with friends, and by the time I finally put my laptop away, there was barely anything for my family, which led to guilt and shame. I wanted to be sure that I remembered every interaction, every discussion exactly. I wanted to be sure that there was no room for gaps in my memory or my story. I just wanted certainty. But beyond certainty, I eventually realized that I wanted to be believed. The thing is, this time, I was being believed, and at times was getting a lot of support. It wasn't until I took time to slow down, reflect, and zoom out that I realized what was happening, that my OCD was merged with a trauma response from 12 years prior, and both were running the show, and that in fact I did have people backing me and supporting me. Recognizing this didn't happen overnight, clearly. It took 12 years and going through an extremely stressful work situation for me to gain that insight. I was in therapy, and I have had a lot of therapy over the years, so that helped. Truly, if I hadn't previously treated my OCD, I would not have been able to work through things the way I did that autumn. The most important pieces for me to rewriting that trauma narrative that was coming up and interrupting the OCD were, one, having a fully developed and mature brain this time around, but two, having support. This time around, not only did I have my family and friends, I had my partner, now husband, and I had coworkers and leaders who were there for me. Whether it's through a hug in the hallway, setting up a meeting to talk things through, sharing a tasty treat, or just a nice text message, it all made such a difference. These people rock. Truly. It's hard with trauma, and even more so with OCD, to use the evidence around us. But relying on my senses, on what was actually happening, grounding in the present moment, instead of viewing the situation through what happened in 2012, allowed me to see that I was being supported this time around. Building a solid group of people you can trust takes time. These are my people. For me, I have those people who I know I can go to and who I know will believe me, or if I'm off base, challenge me to take perspective, challenge me to lean into that uncertainty when it's my OCD, and be there for me. And the frantic desire for that reassurance that I was being believed, that I was remembering it correctly, was certainly still there. But I was able to interrupt the compulsions. I was able to focus on being intentional with my conscientiousness and focus on detail. And when I was able to bring myself back to the present, to remind myself that I wasn't that scared 22-year-old anymore, it was through perspective taking and giving myself permission to lean on others for that support, that my experience was in fact validated. Being able to let go of that need for certainty and instead trust those around me was far more healing than any certainty-seeking behaviors that I had acted on. It wasn't easy after this, but being aware allowed me to be better about it all. And I focused more on getting back to balance and focused on each day, one at a time. Through therapy, I also recognized patterns over the years that were similar to the desire to prove things, to remember things, to be believed. This desire that impacted relationships and my own well-being. While not as extreme as what I experienced in the fall of 2024, the signs that the traumatic event had merged with my OCD were there. I just didn't recognize them. So what worked for me and what works? Therapy and medication. It will take time and patience, but medication is the thing that helps me manage my symptoms quite well. Having been in therapy since I was 12, I have a huge array of skills and tools for managing symptoms of depression, anxiety, and OCD. If you want my personal faves, I'll shout out thought diffusion, non-engagement responses, and using a whole lot of mindfulness. My brain doesn't do meditation and breath work well. It's busy, as I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. Mindfulness for me is being in nature, whether that's taking my dog for a walk and focusing on how my feet feel on the ground, being on top of a 14er, or just sitting in my backyard, bringing my mind back to the present moment when I notice it starts to wander. Mindfulness for me is swimming, and from memory, singing the majority of the Eras tour in my head. Mindfulness could even just be choosing to watch TV and not looking at your phone. Mindfulness and the recognition of the agency I have over my own attention have been helpful for me, especially when it comes to interrupting mental compulsions and shifting perspectives. My other favorite skill, and the thing that has helped me manage my symptoms effectively, has been remembering my values. Remembering that acting on compulsions moves me away from my values. And to me, that's not worth it. Sure, there are moments when the OCD makes it really, really seem like it's worth it to act on those compulsions, but being able to take perspective in those moments and recognize what is at stake, it gives me time to slow down and helps me remember my skills, because ultimately there's a lot at stake if I were to act on my compulsions. We must remember to embrace the uncertainty and lean into the discomfort. That's where growth happens, and that's where we find fulfillment and satisfaction. If I hadn't done this, I would have missed out on so much in life. And for those who have been to any of my presentations, you know this stock photo of a corgi is one that I try to incorporate into all presentations because, I mean, it's just super random and excellent. But anyway, we have to embrace discomfort and uncertainty. But because of embracing discomfort and uncertainty in my life, I've been able to do so much. So, for example, here I am in Madagascar with a lemur. If I had let OCD rule my life, I would have never been able to meet this guy. I would have never let an animal even touch me because of contamination and that intolerable feeling of contamination and grossness when we touch something contaminated and it just feels gross. That I would not have been able to, and look how cute he is. I would have never been able to travel and adventure as much as I have, especially if I let the trauma symptoms stop me. I wouldn't have been able to reach the top of Kilimanjaro with my family, and I wouldn't have been able to meet and travel with the star of my heart, my husband, Kevin. I also would have never found my love and special interest of Colorado 14ers and hiking. And probably most importantly, I would have never become a dog owner and met the other love of my life. The contamination concerns would have never let me have a dog, and the hyper responsibility concerns, no way would I have been able to have a dog who I absolutely adore and am quite hyper fixated on. I mean, look at him. His name is Harrison Ford, by the way. Additionally, having a dog is often a regular practice in ERP, as you can see here. We have one where he threw his toy in the toilet, which was a fun thing. And on the other side, he dug a hole and covered me in dirt. And he is so proud of himself right there. And I was so happy for him. And I ended up with poison ivy on my butt because of this. But he was really happy. And that's values-based for me. Things aren't always unicorns and rainbows. You don't have to be a hero or a wizard to embrace uncertainty and manage your OCD. What you need is courage. Courage comes in all shapes and sizes. It is the long-term commitment to facing difficulties. Courage is about being persistent in the face of failure and despair. And people with OCD are naturally good about being courageous, because often that persistence is hardwired into their temperament, and they are acting on that persistence each and every day to survive and function in spite of the onslaught of intrusive thoughts. Whether it's actively jumping into things that scare you, or the determination and persistence of continuing and saying, you will try again tomorrow. That's what OCD symptom management is about, after all. And in this day and age, we need courage and we need hope. My story, the things I went through, are things I wouldn't wish on anyone. However, they ultimately led me to where I am today. My life is fuller, and I am the therapist and human I am today, not because of them, but because I got through them and continue to get through them each and every day. Our stories, our adventures, don't end with a diagnosis or a struggle. Our stories can begin and continue from those moments, and from how we choose to act in response to those moments. Your story isn't over. Every time you choose uncertainty, you choose adventure. You decide to use the time you are given on this planet. So I'll leave you with words from one of my favorite adventures, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf. And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.